So hello everyone. In the following video, we are going to deal with a very popular topic that is being asked regularly in the various competitive exams, and you can expect at least one question in any exam you are appearing for, right, from this topic. So this topic is the pharyngeal apparatus, right? So although it seems slightly daunting, but we'll try to make the concepts very easy and clear so that it becomes easier for you to remember the various derivatives of the various components from the pharyngeal arches. So let's get started. Right. So we are going to deal with this topic under the following headings. We'll have a very brief introduction about what exactly is the pharyngeal apparatus. Then we'll talk about the pharyngeal arches. Then we'll look at the pharyngeal clefts and the pharyngeal pouches, and then finally we'll round up with a bit of the clinical aspects of this pharyngeal apparatus. Right. So here we can see an image of an early stage embryo, right? It is almost at the beginning of the 4th week, or we can say around the 22nd day of the intrauterine life. And we can identify the cranial neuropore has developed, so has the caudal neuropore. And we can also see the developing pericardial bulge, obviously the vitelline duct and the connecting stalk, right? So here is a still further stage of the developing embryo. So what exactly is the pharynx? So pharynx is the area of the foregut that is in the region of the throat and is located just behind the mouth and the nose, right? So in this picture, what we can identify is that the embryonic folds have already been formed, right? So the foregut that will actually be forming the pharynx is being derived from the part of the yolk sac that's in the head fold, right? So here we can see that there is an overgrowth of this vesicle, which is the forebrain vesicle in the head fold, right? And this overgrowing forebrain vesicle pushes this membrane, that is the buccopharyngeal membrane, into this depression here. So this depression is known as the stomodium, right? So this stomodium is, you can very well identify that it is present cranial to the heart bulge or the pericardial bulge, and the developing pharynx is immediately dorsal and caudal to this stomodium, right? So this is the region of the pharynx, right? So pharynx is actually a primitive developing tube which is present just dorsal and caudal to the stomodium, and it is just cranial to the pericardial bulge, and its various relations are cranially, it is related to the forebrain, the hindbrain is dorsal, right? And it is developing in the region which will form the future neck region, right? So if we want to cut a section through this pharyngeal region, so the pharynx, as I said, is a tube. So it obviously has two lateral walls, a floor and a roof. So the roof is related dorsally to the growing brain vesicles. The floor is related to the pericardial bulge, and two lateral walls are related to the splanchnopleuric mesoderm and the surface ectoderm, right? So if we want to take a sectional view of the pharynx, so the pharynx actually produces certain mesodermal thickenings in between the buccopharyngeal membrane and the pericardial bulge, right? So this mesodermal thickenings are appearing in the form of bars like these, right? So for example, if my left forearm is the developing pharynx, so its wall, that is its roof, its floor, and it has two lateral walls. So its walls, they developed certain bar-like projections which are all around, forming an arch-like structure. So each of my finger is a separate bar, right, around the pharynx, around the pharyngeal wall. So these bars are surrounding the whole lumen of the pharynx, right? So you can see separate bars, but they are approximated together, right? And when you see the lumen, when these bars are approximated together, you will find certain depressions or grooves on the inside. And when you see on the outside, again you will find certain depressions or grooves, right? So this is the lumen of the pharynx, which is the wall of which is forming certain bars. So these bars, because they are surrounding the whole of the tube in an arch-like fashion, so these structures are known as the pharyngeal arches, right? So for example, this here is the first pharyngeal arch, and this here is the second pharyngeal arch. So around the 5th and 6th weeks, 6 such arches, they developed around the wall of the pharynx from the mesoderm, that is the splanchnium pleuric mesoderm of the pharynx, right? Important thing to remember here is that the 5th arch, that is rudimentary and it disappears. So only total 5 arches remain, that is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 6th, right? So that concept you should be very clear about. What exactly are these arches, right? These arches are nothing but the thickened mesoderm around the wall of the developing pharynx. So obviously the inside, that is the inner layer of these arches, will be covered by endoderm, right? Whereas the outer layer of these arches will be formed by the ectoderm, right? So let us move forward. Right. So here again is an open pharyngeal tube, developing primitive pharyngeal tube, and we can see the inside of this tube. So we can identify these bar-like structures, right? This is the first bar. So this is the first arch, then the second arch, the third arch, the fourth arch, and I said the 5th arch is rudimentary and it disappears, right? So now we won't have the 5th arch, instead we will have the 6th arch. So you can very well see the cross section of these bars here will be actually composed of the splanchno-pleuric mesoderm, and on the inside it will be lined by the endoderm, whereas its outer layer will be formed by the ectoderm. So this substance of the bar is the mesoderm, right? So that is a basic idea of the orientation of these pharyngeal arches. So these arches are nothing but bars around the pharyngeal tube, which are continuous dorsally and laterally, and they come and join anteriorly or ventrally in the midline, right? So we have opened this tube from the ventral end and we are looking at the inside of these pharyngeal arches. So what are the various pharyngeal arch components? So now we are going to look at the various components of the arch. So as we saw, there was an inner lining of each arch and an outer lining. So the inner lining was the endoderm and the outer lining was the ectoderm. So each arch is composed, as I said, of the splanchnopleuric mesoderm and also migrated neural crest cells, right? So each arch, the neural crest cells in each arch will form a cartilaginous bar, right? It will form a cartilaginous bar and it will also form a nerve, right? It will also form a nerve that will supply the components developing from this very pharyngeal arch. Apart from the derivatives of the neural crest cells, the splanchnopleuric mesoderm, which forms the majority of the substance of the arch, it will form certain muscular components. And also it will form an artery. So what all structures can we see being derived from one single arch? Firstly, here is the ectoderm, the artery of the arch, the cartilage, the muscle, the nerve, and on the inner side it is lined by the endoderm. And obviously rest of the arch will be having the splanchnopleuric mesoderm. So these are the basic derivatives or the components of each pharyngeal arch. So we have 5 pharyngeal arches. Each of them will have their own cartilaginous components, their own artery, their own muscular derivatives, and their own nerve supply, right? So before we go further, one important point that we need to remember is that in each of the pharyngeal arch, the cartilage may undergo 4 different fates, right? So the cartilage may either persist as a cartilage, or it may disappear. It may disappear completely, right? It may continue being the cartilage or it may disappear. Or it may convert into bone, right? Or finally, the perichondrium of this cartilage may persist or may develop into some ligament. So these are 4 different types of fates that the cartilage of each pharyngeal arch may undergo, that is being developed from the neural crest cells, right? So first of all, let us see the skeletal derivatives of each pharyngeal arch. Right. So let us see the various skeletal derivatives from the first arch. So the cartilage of the first arch is known as the Meckel's cartilage, and it develops into a cranial and smaller maxillary component, right, which will give rise to the premaxilla, the maxilla, the temporal bone, and the zygomatic bone, right? and a more caudal mandibular component, which gives rise to the ear ossicles, the first two ear ossicles, that is the malleus and the incus, right? So there are six bony derivatives arising from the first cartilage, that is the cartilage of the first arch. In addition, there are two ligaments as well. So the first ligament is attached to the malleus, and that is the anterior ligament of malleus, and second ligament is the sphenomandibular ligament, right? So the first arch gives 6 bony components or bony derivatives and 2 ligamentous derivatives. So the 2 ligamentous derivatives are the anterior ligament of malleus and the sphenomandibular ligament, so that the Meckel's cartilage, the perichondrium, that converts into these 2 ligaments. And there are 6 bony components, that is the premaxilla, maxilla, zygomatic, the malleus and incus. So you can identify this part that is being developed, that is the malleus, the incus, and also part of the bone of the mandible. However, the bony part of the mandible does not directly develop from the Meckel's cartilage. It develops from the fibrous tissue around the Meckel's cartilage, right? So although this picture has included the body of the mandible, but mandible does not exactly develop directly from the Meckel's cartilage. So these are the skeletal derivatives from the first pharyngeal arch. Now coming on to the second pharyngeal arch. One important thing you can note here is that the second pharyngeal arch starts with the letter S. So most of the skeletal components from this pharyngeal arch will be starting with the letter S. And what are these various components? Number one is the third ear ossicle that is left, that is the stapes. One important thing that has been asked in some exams, that the foot plate of stapes does not develop from the second pharyngeal arch, right? Only the body of the stapes, that is the stapes bone itself, is developing from the second pharyngeal arch, but its foot plate does not develop from this arch, right? So please keep that in mind. Then the second component, the second skeletal component developing from here, which you can see here, is the styloid process, right? So the styloid process also develops from this second pharyngeal arch. The third component which you can see here is a ligament, which is the stylohyoid ligament, and this is obviously connecting the styloid process to the hyoid bone. So the hyoid bone has a body and 2 cornua. So the lesser cornua or the short or lesser cornua of the hyoid, which we can identify here, right? And the superior part or the upper part of the body of the hyoid. Both of these components are of the hyoid bone, right? So you can see that all these skeletal derivatives you can remember that they are starting with the letter S, right, for the second pharyngeal arch, right? And so is the ligamentous derivative. Okay, so these are the skeletal derivatives of the second pharyngeal arch, and this pharyngeal arch also has a name, that is Reichert's cartilage. The cartilage of this arch is known as the Reichert's cartilage. So first arch had the Meckel's cartilage, and the second pharyngeal arch will be having the Reichert's cartilage. Okay, so let us come to the third pharyngeal arch. So the third pharyngeal arch, as you can see this area here, it gives rise to the rest of the parts of the hyoid, that is the greater cornua and the lower part of the body. Both of these are components of the hyoid bone, right? So the third pharyngeal arch, its cartilaginous derivatives are the lower part of the body of the hyoid and the greater cornua. The fourth arch, along with the sixth arch, they together give rise to the cartilages of larynx. The only exception to them is the epiglottis, right? So epiglottis is the only cartilage of the larynx which does not develop from the fourth or sixth pharyngeal arches. In fact, it develops from the hypobranchial eminence. So please remember that the epiglottis is the only cartilage of the larynx which is not developing directly from the cartilage of any pharyngeal arch, right? So these are the various skeletal derivatives of the various pharyngeal arches. So now that we have looked at the skeletal components of the various pharyngeal arches, let us look at the muscular derivatives, right? So let us begin with the first pharyngeal arch. So the muscular derivatives of the first pharyngeal arch are the muscles of mastication, and there are four muscles of mastication which are the temporalis, the masseter, the lateral and the medial pterygoids. So these are the four muscles of mastication. The next muscle that is derived from the first pharyngeal arch is the mylohyoid. Then there is the anterior belly of the digastric, and finally there are the two tensor muscles. First is the tensor veli palatini, and finally is the tensor tympani, right? So these muscles can be remembered by the mat preceding an M preceding it and a T following it, right? So muscles of mastication, the mylohyoid, the anterior belly of digastric, and the two tensors. So these are the muscular derivatives of the first pharyngeal arch. Now when we come to the second pharyngeal arch, what are the various muscular derivatives? Firstly, as you can see here, the muscles of facial expression. That means the muscle supplied by the facial nerve. Then, because the anterior belly of digastric was supplied by the first pharyngeal arch, so here the posterior belly of digastric. Then we have the stylohyoid muscle, and finally the very small but important muscle, that is the stapedius, which is connected to the stapes. So these four are the muscles of the second pharyngeal arch. A very popular question that is usually asked regarding the muscular derivatives is the muscle of the third pharyngeal arch, which is only a single muscle, and that muscle is the stylopharyngeus. Right? So this muscle should be remembered because it has been asked multiple times in various examinations, the only muscular derivative of the third pharyngeal arch. Then talking about the next pharyngeal arch, that is the fourth arch. So what are the various muscular derivatives? Firstly, it gives rise to the constrictors of pharynx, right? Then the muscles of the palate, except the muscle which we have already seen in the first pharyngeal arch, except the tensor villi palatini. This was already encountered in the first pharyngeal arch. And finally, an intrinsic muscle of the larynx, that is the cricothyroid. Only the muscle of the larynx, that is the cricothyroid, which is arising from the fourth pharyngeal arch. Finally, the sixth arch, it gives rise to all the muscles of, that is the intrinsic muscles of larynx, except which muscle that we have already seen above, that is the cricothyroid. So please remember this important point, that the cricothyroid is the only muscle not being developed together with the other intrinsic muscles of the larynx. It is being developed from the fourth pharyngeal arch, whereas all the other laryngeal muscles are developing from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Now, when we talk about the nerves of each of these pharyngeal arches, before that, we need to note a point that each of the pharyngeal arch is initially supplied by two nerves. One nerve is known as the pretraumatic branch, whereas the other nerve is known as the post-traumatic branch. So the post-traumatic branch is usually the nerve that is supplying the same pharyngeal arch, whereas the pre-traumatic branch supplies the previous pharyngeal arch. But during the course of development, all the pre-traumatic branches, they degenerate, they disappear, except the pre-traumatic branch to the first pharyngeal arch, right? So let us see what are the various branches and what are the various nerves of these pharyngeal arches. So for the first pharyngeal arch, as we just talked about, there is the pre-traumatic branch, that is the chorda tympani nerve, and the post-traumatic nerve is the mandibular nerve. right? So these two are the nerves of the first pharyngeal arch. The second pharyngeal arch is solely supplied by the facial nerve, which is the seventh nerve, right? And chorda tympani is also the component of the seventh nerve, whereas the mandibular nerve is from the fifth nerve, that is the trigeminal nerve. So you can see the chorda tympani is actually the pre-traumatic branch of the nerve of the second pharyngeal arch, that is the facial nerve. The third pharyngeal arch is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the ninth cranial nerve. The fourth and sixth pharyngeal arches are supplied by the branches of the vagus nerve. The fourth nerve is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve, whereas the sixth arch is supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Both of these are branches of the vagus nerve, that is the 10th cranial nerve. Now, as we talked before, each pharyngeal arch has its own arterial supply, right? So, the arteries of these pharyngeal arches are connecting the dorsal aorta here with the aortic sac ventrally, right? So, the aortic arteries are connecting these two major arterial systems. So, let us see what are the various arterial supply or the arterial branches in each of the pharyngeal arches. So, for the first pharyngeal arch, the artery is the maxillary artery. The second pharyngeal arch gives rise to the stapedial artery, right? The third aortic arch gives rise to not one but two different arterial systems, that is the common carotid and the internal carotid, right? The fourth pharyngeal arch gives rise to the proximal part of the right subclavian and the arch of aorta. And finally, the sixth arch gives rise to the pulmonary arteries on the right side and the ductus arteriosus on the left side, which will convert into ligamentum arteriosum, right? So, how to remember these? What I used to remember. So, first maximize, right? First maximize the secondary steps. So, I used to remember this like first maximize the secondary steps and then come in, that means first you maximize your secondary steps, then you come in, that is common carotid and internal. Now, for the fourth and fourth arterial arch, I have written FOURS, right? So, 4 rhymes with aorta, right? Our or aorta. So, one branch is the arch of aorta and R and S stand for right subclavian, right? So, you can remember this by not writing fourths instead of writing fours. So, there are two branches, one rhymes with 4, that is arch of aorta, and other starts with the letters R and S. So the right subclavian. And the sixth arch, you can remember the numeral 6 and you can write it as a mirror image, and then you can actually contain them in the shape of the lungs. So you can remember that these would be supplying the lungs. So the pulmonary arteries which are supplying the lungs, you can remember with the numeral 6, right? So this is a sort of easy way to memorize the arteries of the various pharyngeal arches. So when we talk about the pharyngeal clefts, what exactly are clefts? We saw initially that the bars that the pharyngeal arches are making on the external surface that is lined by the ectoderm, they also have certain grooves, right? So in between my fingers, if I oppose my fingers together, in between the fingers we can see the various grooves. These grooves on the ectodermal surface of each of the pharyngeal arches between the two adjacent arches, these are known as ectodermal clefts or pharyngeal clefts, right? So because we have a total of the first arch, the second arch, third arch, the fourth arch and the sixth arch, we have the first cleft, second cleft, third cleft and the fourth cleft. So we have 4 ectodermal clefts. So obviously this lining on the outer surface will be the ectoderm. So each of the clefts is lined by the surface ectoderm. Now important thing to note here is that the cleft between the first and second arches, this forms the epithelial lining of the external acoustic meatus or the external auditory meatus, right? So this first pharyngeal cleft forms the epithelial lining of the external acoustic meatus. Also the acuticular layer of the tympanic membrane. So the first pharyngeal cleft is responsible for the lining of 2 areas, that is the external acoustic meatus and the acuticular layer of the tympanic membrane. Now what happens afterwards? This second pharyngeal arch, the mesenchymal component, it rapidly grows and it actually surrounds the other clefts. That means the cleft between the second and third, the third and fourth, and the fourth and sixth arches, right? So you can see what is happening is the second arch, the ectoderm, the mesenchymal component, it overgrows the second cleft, the third cleft and the fourth cleft, right? And finally it fuses with the sixth arch. So what are we left with? We are left with this potential space, and this potential space is then known as the cervical sinus. So you can see the cervical sinus will obviously be lined by the ectoderm. The cervical sinus is a slit-like cavity which is lined by the ectoderm, right? Because it is formed by the overgrowing ectodermal side of the second pharyngeal arch. Actually, the growth is of the mesenchymal component, but because it is lined by the ectoderm all around, this cervical sinus, this becomes lined by the ectoderm, right? Later on, with development, this sinus, becomes smaller and smaller, and finally it disappears. But in some cases, the cervical sinus, it may persist, right? So when it persists, it may persist in the form of a cyst. So it is also known as the branchial cyst. And this is a cyst which is found in the region of the neck. And sometimes it may communicate both internally or it may communicate externally. So then it becomes a fistula. When it communicates with either end, then it forms, instead of a cyst, it becomes a fistula. When we talk about the pharyngeal pouches are the depressions in between the pharyngeal arches on the luminal surface. So these pouches are running circumferentially in the lumen of the developing pharynx, right? So if this is the lumen of the developing pharynx, these pouches are present in between the parallel running pharyngeal arches, and they are lined by the endoderm. So if we look at the interior of the developing pharynx, we can see here that this is the circumferentially running first pouch, the second pouch, and so on, right? So since the pouches are running circumferentially, they can give rise to structures which can develop either anteriorly or ventrally, or they can develop posteriorly or dorsally. So each pouch can give rise to certain structures both anteriorly as well as posteriorly. So when we look at the picture once again for the pharyngeal pouches, the first pharyngeal pouch, it actually wants to give rise to some structures both anteriorly and posteriorly, but it cannot give rise to any structure ventrally or anteriorly. Why? Because anterior to it is developing another structure from two swellings, which are the lingual swellings and the tuberculum impar. So these structures are giving rise to what we know as the tongue, right? So anteriorly, the space is already occupied by the developing tongue. So the first pharyngeal pouch cannot give rise to any structure anteriorly. However, it may give rise to something dorsally. The second pharyngeal pouch actually comes to the rescue of the first pharyngeal pouch, and the second pharyngeal pouch provides its dorsal component to the first pharyngeal pouch. So what we mean by this is the first pharyngeal pouch wanted to develop something anteriorly, but because the tongue is being developed anteriorly, it does not have space. So it only has the dorsal component left. The second pharyngeal pouch from below also provides its dorsal component, and together these two dorsal components give rise to this blue structure, which is known as the tubotympanic recess. So the tubotympanic recess will give rise to the eustachian tube, the tympanic cavity, and it will also line the inner wall of the tympanic membrane. Like the first cleft was lining the outer wall of the tympanic membrane, so the tubotympanic recess will give rise to the eustachian tube, the tympanic cavity, and the inner lining of tympanic membrane, right? So this tubotympanic recess is being formed by the dorsal component of the first pharyngeal pouch and also aided by the dorsal component of the second pharyngeal pouch. Now the second pharyngeal pouch has no problem developing anteriorly as well. So this red structure that is being developed from the second pharyngeal pouch is the tonsillar bed. That means it will give rise to the palatine tonsil. And which part of the palatine tonsil? The stroma and the epithelial lining, right? Because palatine tonsil is a lymphoid organ, so it will require lymphoid cells, lymphoid tissue. So lymphoid tissue will invaginate this growing palatine tonsil from the mesoderm. So the second pharyngeal pouch will give rise to the palatine tonsil. Now there is something very interesting going on between the third and the fourth pharyngeal pouches. So we have talked about the first pharyngeal pouch and the second pharyngeal pouch. Now when we talk about the third pharyngeal pouch, we can see it has two components once again. The upper one is the dorsal component and the lower one is the ventral component, right? So the dorsal component is this and the ventral component is shown in brown. So the dorsal component gives rise to the inferior parathyroid and the ventral component gives rise to the thymus. So the thymus, because it is an anteriorly placed structure, it is also a lymphoid organ. So the thymus actually migrates downwards or inferiorly or caudally, and together with it, it takes along the inferior parathyroid gland. So the final location of the thymus would be in the anterior mediastinum or the superior mediastinum. So the thymus, it migrates inferiorly, and together it also pulls down this part, that is the inferior parathyroid gland. The thyroid has already started developing in the region of the neck, right? So the thyroid has already started developing, okay, and it is developing from this small area that is known as the foramen caecum, invagination from the foramen caecum. So when the thymus, it migrates inferiorly, it takes along with it the inferior parathyroid, both of which are developing from the third pharyngeal pouch, right? So the third pharyngeal pouch is giving rise to the inferior parathyroid and the thymus. What happens to the fourth pharyngeal pouch? The fourth pharyngeal pouch actually again has two components, a dorsal component and a ventral component. The dorsal component again is the superior parathyroid, right? And it will actually take place towards the superior pole of the thyroid gland, posterior aspect of the superior pole of the thyroid gland, whereas the inferior parathyroid has migrated towards the inferior pole of the thyroid gland. And the other component of the fourth pouch is known as the ultimobranchial body, and this ultimobranchial body also migrates towards the thyroid, and it provides the parafollicular or C cells of the thyroid, right? So we have seen the four pharyngeal pouches. The first pouch with a component from the second pouch gives rise to the tubotympanic recess, which forms the eustachian tube, the tympanic cavity, and the inner lining of the tympanic membrane. The second pouch gives rise to the palatine tonsil, right? The third pouch gives rise to the inferior parathyroid and the thymus, whereas the fourth pouch gives rise to the superior parathyroid and the ultimobranchial body. Why is it known as the ultimobranchial body? Because it is the ultimate, the final part of the branchial or pharyngeal pouches, right? So as we have seen that only the first pharyngeal cleft gives rise to what we saw as the external acoustic meatus lining, and the rest of the clefts were obliterated. But when we see the pouches, we see all the four pouches giving rise to some components which are present in the anterior part of the neck, and especially the glandular components, be it the components of the thyroid gland or the thymus, right? So mostly the lymphoid part is being developed from the pharyngeal pouches. Now we shall quickly look at a few applied aspects of the pharyngeal apparatus development. So here we can see that as we saw the obliteration of the second, third and fourth pharyngeal clefts in the form of the cervical sinus. So the cervical sinus is lined by the ectoderm, and sooner or later it obliterates, but sometimes it persists as in the form of a cyst. So such cysts are known as branchial cysts, and their common locations are the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. You can see they are usually found anterior to the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid muscle. When these cysts, they communicate either into the internal surface or to the external surface, they become fistulas. So instead of cysts, they then become fistulas. So cervical sinuses and cervical cyst and fistulas are because of errors of development of the pharyngeal clefts. Then we come on to certain syndromes which are due to a defective formation of the various pharyngeal arches. Most common of them is the first arch syndrome. So what happens in the first arch syndrome? There is failure of migration of the neural crest cells into the first pharyngeal arch. So when the failure of migration of neural crest cells happens, there is defective formation of the skeletal component and the connective tissue component of the face and the head, right? So the very first example of the first arch syndrome is the Treacher-Collins syndrome. So this Treacher-Collins syndrome is also known as mandibulofacial dysostosis. So this is known as the mandibulofacial dysostosis. It is autosomal dominant, right? And it is due to the defect in the gene TCOF1, right? And this gene is usually on the chromosome number 5. So what are the features of this Treacher-Collins syndrome? There is mandibular hypoplasia, right? The first feature is mandibular hypoplasia. Then the defective development of the zygomatic bone, so that is known as malar hypoplasia. Then as you can see, the palpebral fissures are slanting downwards. So down slanting palpebral fissures, right? And you can see there is defect in the external ear. So there is external ear malformation. So these are the features of Treacher-Collins syndrome, which is a type of first arch syndrome in which there is failure of migration of neural crest cells. The second example of the first arch syndrome is known as Peary-Robin syndrome. So this syndrome is usually on the chromosomes number 2, 11 and 17, and the gene involved is the SOX-G gene. And the various features, as you can see, there is micrognathia. That means a smaller sized lower jaw, that is smaller sized mandible, right? And there is a receding chin. Secondly, there is, so the first feature is micrognathia, and the second feature is glossoptosis. That means a large sized tongue that is pushed backwards in the oral cavity, right? So tongue that is large as compared to the normal size, and it may also cause airway obstruction. And the final feature of this Peary-Robin syndrome is a cleft palate. So these three basic features are usually common in the Peary-Robin syndrome, which is also a type of first arch syndrome in which there is failure of migration of the neural crest cells, right? So that is all about the applied aspects of the pharyngeal apparatus. So I hope you can now remember the various derivatives which are constantly being asked in various competitive exams of the skeletal components, the muscular components, the arches, the arterial supply of each arch, and the nerve supply of each arch. Finally, you should be able to remember the derivatives of the pharyngeal pouches because they are being asked again and again, right? So that is all about the pharyngeal apparatus.